Righty, welcome everyone. We'll get started. It's great to have everyone, officers and elected members in the room. Great to have you with us. Councillor O'Reilly, you looking okay? Yeah, back to health. And Councillor Burt will be with us in a moment. She's just grabbing a cup of tea. So we'll move on forward. Councillor Piddington, support the big calculator. So. But it's going to be a good fun day. We've only got one item on the agenda though, so it might be quick. I doubt that. Look, we'll pass over now to the team and we'll start working our way through it. I guess as far as elected members go, when it comes to questions, let's just try and work through the material in an orderly fashion so we're not bouncing around. Pass over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much. Kia ora tātou. It's my pleasure to present to you the draft annual plan for 22-23. I would like to thank the team here with me who have worked really hard to pull this together, sandwiched between an annual report that took 9 months to deliver and then the next annual report following along and preparations for that continuing right now. So great effort, team. Well done. Some key headlines that I'd like to point out just as we go forward. There's no such thing as a certain time. I would suggest that we're in a more uncertain time than what we have been before. So the approach that we've taken as a team is actually to start from what we know. And what we know is the base of the year 2 LTP. And that has formed the basis of what we're doing. And then we're taking exceptions that we know about now. So there's some pieces in here that we have some view of coming. Fluoridation would be a good example of that, but it's not in the books as yet. So we haven't included that sort of information here. I've got absolutely no doubt that we'll have to deal with further exceptions as we go through the rest of the year. So we'll keep that and we'll be managing that across time. In terms of what we're delivering here, the draft budget actually meets the expectations of year 2 of the LTP. This is in regard to surplus, OPEX, CAPEX spend and rates rise. It is all sitting within that framework. And the other point I would make is that we have used the best independent and objective evidence that we've got available to us in our crystal ball to do things like inflation and all those sorts of items. Overall, we've continued to maintain a strong financial position and that will give us the ability to continue to fund our capital works program that we're going forward with. But it is important to note that as a team, we need to keep this position in the back of our mind. So when we're making decisions, we have to understand the consequence of both increasing spend and removing spend as we go forward. And I think it's a key piece that we have to just sort of park at the back here as a team to make sure that we've got that in mind. In terms of structure of running through the report, what I'd like to suggest is that we sort of follow the report structure as it were. So we go, Mark, take us through the overview, Lily, take us through the draft CAPEX, Azura, take us through the financial spend, and we stop at the end of each session and do questions at that point, if that's all right with everyone. Alrighty. Okay, without any further ado, I'll hand over to Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, might worth just so the team can pick up on line. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So as you know, an annual plan is required under the Local Government Act every year. So in terms of, or in between LTP periods, we do an annual plan. It's a requirement of the Act. It's essentially, as Steve mentioned, it's an exceptions-based plan. So it's based on year 2 of the LTP document, and that's our base information. So obviously, a lot of the information that's coming through in it flows from that in terms of projects and numbers and all that sort of thing. It's all flowing through from that into this document. And essentially, I guess the role of the annual plan is to update it for the current situation and bring in any exceptions, differences that might have happened over that period. Obviously, LTP was, only what, 9 months? No, what are we? 9 months, 19 months ago. So it's not that long ago. But even in that period, there's still change that does happen. So in terms of what the overview talks about, it's really just around the environment that we currently find ourselves in. In terms of the, Azora will talk to the financial aspects, but obviously with our strategic environment, there's a whole lot of stuff going in nationally and internationally, directly affecting the sector in a whole range of areas. So obviously you've got things like the 3 big reform processes that are going on that will eventually impact on us from a function point of view potentially. Obviously a lot of debate going on in that space still. We've got things like the Russia-Ukraine war that has impacted across the world and will flow through into some of our costs at some point. So that's flowing through into things like inflationary pressures and the whole thing to do with contracts and escalating construction costs and that sort of thing. So all of that we've tried to incorporate as part of the process and as part of this document. I guess really it's, I don't know, do you want to cover any of the financial parts as part of that, Zora? Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. And so I guess as part of the financial, the key document talks about the financial strategy. So we have stuck to what we've got in the LTP, just to remind us all. So the debt to revenue ratio, maintaining it at 210%, as well as the average rate increases at 4.9% is the overall strategy that's been used in terms of funding and financials. And of course, we also had a balanced budget planned for 2023 year, so that's quite key as well. And we've worked within those 3 key parameters for the financials. Did we want to jump into the Burl factor, Mark? You want to?
Sorry.
No, you're right. So as you would have seen, obviously the LTP is based on an assumption. What we've done for the annual plan is update it for a new assumption for the annual plan. So every year we do get a new set of numbers from Burl that flow through and are used for the annual plan. So that did, in terms of the LTP, it showed an inflation increase, I think it was about 2.9%. The new figures came out at 2.4. So the document has been based on that number, given that that's the best sort of independent advice that we do have available. And we did sort of go back to them and ask, well, is there going to be an update in light of the current situation? And that advice won't be coming forward, and there won't be an update. So in terms of, I guess, what we're presenting through the annual plan, it's about using that number across the board for the update to the plan, and obviously there'll be differences within different activities as to how that affects things. We'll need anything to that? Probably get another mic.
Yeah, there is no left.
You're doing a good job there, Steve. Yeah, keep that up. Well done.
Thank you. So I'll just talk through now the adherence to the financial strategy and carry on into the high level financials. So as we've noted, we've stuck to the principles, predominantly sticking to the budget. I guess the key outline is that within the funding, we've achieved 154%. So that's talking to the 210, how are we tracking? So that's actually, we've still got quite a bit of headroom, and that's a really good position for us to be tracking at this time, given the uncertainties that Mark has highlighted already around the Burl and inflationary pressures. In terms of the forecasted debt position, so dollar-wise, that comes out to be 181 mil compared to 156 mil in the annual plan. But again, talking to the percentages, that's still very much within it. And of course, Lily will go through the capital expenditure to talk through what's rebudgeted and forecasted and so on in the details. So there have been some potential adjustments that we've looked at, but mainly as Steve and Mark have explained just before, we've stuck with the material changes that we know. So effectively, that's if it's legislative, we brought that in. And if it's not within our control, we brought that in. So you'll see quite a theme right across the pages, that things that have come basically because we've got no controllers offices, or we've been in a position, we've got to have that in there. And where we have had those, we've also tried to identify savings. So the units have really worked really hard to see where can we actually offset these. And so across the report, you'll see that coming through as well. In terms of the preparation of the financing costs, so that's always an interesting one to look at. That is very difficult, as we've just discussed, but we've done the best we can, and we've also sought some advice from Bancorp as well in the numbers that reflected. We do intend to reflect this again in the Q3 forecast. So before we adopt, we will reflect it as best as possible in the information at hand. So that's just something to keep in mind as we work through. In terms of where we've landed for the actual dollar values, so this is just talking to table on page 11, the summary of where we've got to total revenue at 102 against 100, and also surplus at 259 against 247. So that's just a 12K different actually. So we've gone very close to LTP figures there. As we've addressed before, the sufficient increase of 4.9% does cover off at the moment all of our funding requirements. So that's why within the budget. In terms of the gains, you'll see there's quite a big number there, which is 20 mil, and that relates to the building revaluations. You'll remember during the audit process where we spoke about revaluations and how much audit has been concentrating on that. So effectively what we've done in this AP process is to try and take a percentage to avoid having to end the year in the AR process, having not considered that factor. So this is an unknown at this point in time. Of course, once we do the full revaluation of land and buildings, that will come in a bit more detail. But at this point in time, we've just done what the sector guidance has been, and that's the best estimate of what's possible. I'll just pause there. So that's just very high level, but it might be a good chance to just pause and reflect, and if there's any questions on that.
Thanks, Azura. I'll just go to a comment from Bede, and then we'll go to questions.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so just the main driver in terms of the total revenue, the main driver was a change in fees and charges. There are one or two other differences, but really the fees and charges have adjusted for costs we end up incurring that we often have to pass on, and a classic is the emissions trading unit sort of things, or the waste minimisation levy and so on. So that has been, which has gone up from $20 a tonne to $30, I believe, is it, Andrew? So that's the sort of driver in the fees, the driver in that increase in revenue of 1.7, nearly $1.8 million, offset by increases in fees and charges.
Thank you. Councillor Piddington.
Thanks, Azura. Point 18, the council's forecast a net debt position of 181 million in its annual plan, with a forecast debt of 156 million. What was the 25 million difference?
Yes, so when we get to the capital section, we will be looking at the carry forwards, and majority of that will relate to that. Yeah.
Okay. And just one other question, 16, we've got a self-imposed debt to revenue limit in revenue coming in. I mean, this is one of the things Three Waters are going to impact, isn't it? Sadly, if our revenue goes down, our ability to spend will be less. That capital project area.
Yes, yes, correct.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's quite right. And so roughly, I think the numbers I could add, Andrew might know them, but in the order of $22 odd million is what comes in from water, one way or another, rates, fees and charges, etc. So if you multiply that by 2.1, you're talking $45 million. What someone would say on the counter, and I don't profess to have, say that it's correct, but what they'd say is you won't have to spend as much either because you haven't got those assets to invest. That, that would be their position. But I'm not sure we would agree with that, but that's what they're trying to say, and the government is saying is you won't have to spend that money, so therefore you won't need that revenue, is sort of their position.
Thanks, Stu. Any further questions? Councillor Booth.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Ian. There's a couple of things. I guess I got a set of numbers Steve sent through on Friday, basically with actuals. Will I talk about those now, or will it's not really? Is that a separate part of the report or not?
Where are you getting questions from? Are they probably further?
2021 numbers, is it?
Yeah, the actuals
Yeah, so
against the
I
long-term
guess,
plan.
so yeah, I guess the content of this report is the LTP, but if there's anything that has a flow on, if it, we're quite happy to.
So I guess the word exceptions-based plan means that you aggregate and compare the incoming data to compared with the desired baseline, meaning that you can make adjustments on the way through. So you're constantly updating the numbers. So therefore, the numbers should not vary that much from the actuals, but they actually do. So I guess that's my first question is how often do you actually upgrade those numbers, and if they are different, they should actually show a reason why they are different. So it just as a note within this report, basically. And I know that I asked for the numbers separately, so probably didn't have time to put perhaps the reasons in the report. But I think the debt in the long-term plan is 160 million, whereas actually only 60. So the actual, that's a long way out. And also I was just wondering, obviously the income is down by over 10%, and compared to the actual long-term plan. And I guess so again, is there an issue there? While we keep looking at numbers in the future, but actually you need to have something in the past to compare to. So I guess that's my, it's not really it's probably more of a comment, but certainly that affects our debt to ratio, to all our ratios in what we're actually really doing. So not
I'm
really.
quite happy to take that one. So I guess a couple of things. So the 2021 actuals will be quite different to obviously the 2022 forecast of the LTP, as well as 23 forecast. And I guess the adoption of the LTP year 1, 2, and 3 was adopted on basis of certain assumptions around the forecasted increases around the various operating and capital expenditure. And therefore, the preparation of the annual plan has been as year 2 of the LTP versus the year 2 of the budget, which is effectively just looking at the plan. And of course, that's why we went through the LTP process of rigorously looking at what is it we're going to plan for the future 3 years. Looking at actuals in 2021, while it's useful to say what happened in that year, might not necessarily reflect the decisions that the officers and the council has made during the LTP process. So keeping that in mind, that's where we call it the exceptions to LTP year 2, because there was a lot of commitments made during the LTP plan, as you know, going back on the discussions that we had during the LTP process. So that's why the exception is based on year 2, not the actuals of the AR of year, which is effectively 2 years ago.
But
if
in
you
order
look
for
at
us to have confidence in your plan, we should, when we see the actual, that's actually gives us an idea how accurate it is. And so in the forecast, all the debt was supposed to be.
Hold on, sorry, just so the guys online can hear, Councillor Spinning, can you just jump out and let, no, you're right, thanks.
100 was supposed to be 162 million. It's actually only 60 million and 984,000. So, when I'm looking at projections and outcomes, that's a significant difference, and it certainly doesn't reflect what's in there in regards to how it should be an ongoing plan that gives you a true reflection of the numbers. So, and you know, we're supposed to have an income of 59,515,000. We actually had 53 million. So there's a shortfall of $6 million.
So, Councillor, are you speaking off that further information that?
Well, it's on.
Can you refer to page just so everyone else can follow?
This is off the prospective statement of comprehensive revenue and expense sent through on Friday afternoon. First page.
Councillor, can I just ask those numbers specifically that you're referring to?
Well, the number from the 59,515,000 is from the long-term plan, from the projected, and the actual is 53,681,000. So you'll find that on the first. You'll find that number on the.
According to the financial reports we adopted on the 27th of March 2021 year, the 53,681 were the rates we collected for the actual, and my understanding was that looking at this, we budgeted for it in that year 53,556. So that was the LTP number. Now, the reason it was down was the prior year we had not increased the rates by as much. We had dropped it because of the COVID lockdown from 6% or 7% down to 2%. And so that's why you've got that adjustment. And this is one of the challenges of looking at a budget for 2023 when you're trying to look at comparatives for 2021, which were prepared on a different basis. So the reason for that difference of 53,681 versus 53,556 is that in that year where we had the first lockdown, we didn't go for the full rate rise. Was it 6.7 or 7.4 or something like that? We went for 2%, I think it was. And that's the difference. It was my understanding of the calculated number.
So should we not be updating those numbers when we make those decisions so they're reflected?
No, because that's so if you look here, what the Act requires us to do is to put in the LTP numbers, and we have to report against the LTP numbers. So every year, and this is one of the challenges, is that by the time you get to year 3, you've actually had quite a few adjustments over a number of years. In this case, it was COVID intervening. So the number you set on the late in June 2018 became the number you had to report against as your budgeted number for 30 June 2021. And that's where the challenge arises, as you're forecasting out over quite a period of time with all the adjustments in between.
Yeah, okay. Well, perhaps that should have been shown as in beside here, just to and have a note attached so as we can actually understand if that's the case. But clearly in the information that we're given, both pieces of paper did not show that. And certainly the initial one, long-term plan, shows 59,515,000 and a result of 53.
That 59.
Sorry,
million.
Councillor Booth, the 59 is LTP 2022.
Correct. Yes.
21.
However, the 53 is actual 2021.
That's it. That's correct. And
Correct.
so what was our 2021 LTP?
That was
53,556.
53,556. Okay. Right, well, that's where, yeah, okay. I understand that. Okay, thank you. I guess the other question I had was other revenue, and that's plus 7.4. So is that income coming in from?
Yes, so a fair chunk of that, Councillor Booth, fair chunk of that other revenue would have been in that year 2021 was probably funding from the Three Waters stimulus. We would have had about $3 million. And Andrew, did we get extra funding as a result of any flooding events in that year? Yeah. Okay, so most of that extra funding would certainly, part of it would have been some of the Three Waters stimulus funding. because we got 6.8 in September 2020, and we had spent some of that. Probably about half, I would think. I'm looking at the accountants here with the adjustment we made with the auditors. About half of that was recorded as revenue received during the 2021 financial year.
Yeah, okay. And okay, so we'll go then to the debt.
Yes. So the debt position in 2021 was 60. We had, and if you look on down there on that prospective one sent out, we had borrowings of 38.5 million. So that's the portion that's repayable in the next 12 months, but is effectively borrowings we took for funding capital works. And then also that number of 60 million, so or nearly 61 million. So the net position, the between the two, your 61 million and say 38,500,000, you're just touching $100 million as the gross borrowings, and they're offset by the cash that we hold at the end of the year.
So what was our true debt to ratio, debt to asset ratio? As we've been told in the report, it's a certain number.
Oh, so we had about, according to the financial statements, we had probably 25 or $26 million worth of cash on hand at 30 June. And so offsetting that, say, against 100, sort of 75 million is the net debt position. So our debt position, of course, is reflective of how much capital work we've done. And we were ramping up our capital work during that year, but of course the previous year hadn't had as much. So we were not as advanced in our debt profile as we had expected to be. Of course, now what's happening is that as the capital work ramps up, and this year we're looking to spend more than last year, we'll be borrowing even more again. So I think if you look at it on a like-for-like basis, we were about probably 26 or $27 million behind on our debt position where we thought we would be.
Right. So it's just a matter of timing then.
I think it is largely a matter of timing, Councillor Piddington, and what you'll see out over this year, Councillor Booth, what you'll see out over this year is that our debt will continue to climb as we go through the capital work. Because we will, in the past, we've undertaken about $30 to $31 million of capital work every year, of which around about 20 has been able to be funded by cash flow that we've generated. So we've had very modest borrowings. This year and last year, we will do well over $100 million. We don't have the final number, but you can see that we're doing in 2 years what might have taken us 3 to 4 years in the past. And the funding source of that is borrowings. So our debt position will rise quite significantly, but has been modelled and it has been profiled into the financial position.
And I guess the asset revaluation reserves, do you just simply keep increasing that, assuming increased value in this?
So they're done, yeah. So that was a curveball we got. There's a bit of a complication here. That was a curveball we got last year in terms of the LTP, where quite near the end they came and asked us to revalue all our property. So that's like this building, the halls, and so on. And they almost asked it. They asked it a few days before we were to present the consultation document. And that's a year's work probably to go around and value all a council's property. And they asked it like, would you please get a loaf of bread on the way home from the super, on the way home. What we did was make an adjustment to our accounting policy to say, for the purposes of the LTP, we would record our property at cost price. What we're now doing is actually recording it at fair value. And so we have to fair value all our property in the same way we fair value our roads and our water. Now, for roads and water, Andrew, they're done on unit rates, is that correct? To replace it. So that's how we value those, give them a fair value as a unit rate for the equipment, and the kit and the materials and the labour and all of that goes into, and we say this is what it will cost. So effectively on current unit rates, we're saying it would cost about $440, $450 million to replace our Three Waters assets. And they had a big increase in valuation over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So and Azura, that's what I think Azura was referring to, is this time round it's property's turn.
Yes, correct, yeah.
That's fine, thank you.
Cool, thanks, Alan. Just comment from Councillor Piddington on the screen in regard to the 12 million for cultural centre. I guess as far as that income lands, the majority of that will be in the next financial, won't it? I'm not sure. Did you want to speak to that at all, Councillor Burt?
No, it's just merely when you were looking for some of the income that we're getting.
So I was just, I can see that the numbers are still climbing.
I've lost you. I lost you?
No, we're listening. We'll listen to something else as well.
Oh, yeah. So just drawing attention when you're looking at that. I just want to, this might be a very obvious statement, but in order to, with the depth of questions that are going into this report, it would be very handy if you do know these questions need to be answered to supply a list the day before or days before, and then with the view of, I know Councillor Piddington, it sounds weird, but it does help our staff, and they can be answered and asked and answered again in this forum, so that they have the ability to give you the appropriate answer and have the appropriate figures and everything. So I'm just saying, it may sound obvious, but it would help our staff if that could happen.
Thanks, Councillor Burt. Go now to a question, Councillor Piddington.
Yeah, looking at the perspective statement of comprehensive income, which we've just been talking about, personnel costs, and again, it's Alan's point, and I get what you're saying about how it steps, but there's an 18% rise from actuals to forecast that you're still saying is on target. What also makes me suspicious, it's one of the only figures that actually matches, hasn't gone up or down. So I know we put some new staff in, but probably to you, Bede, have we been rigorous in that? Because the uninitiated looking in, that's a massive increase in 2 years.
Yes, so I'm just pulling it up. So at the yes, at the long-term plan last year, we increased the remuneration for personnel by about $2.8 million, and I'm just looking at that. I think I've got that here in the report, and what we did was we went through the sort of the drivers of it at the LTP last year. So most of it is from 2020, from the 2021 year, sorry, the 2020 year to the 2021 year. So that was at the last LTP. Last year, we increased by $2.8 million the amount of remuneration. And there are a number of drivers. Some of those were the pay equity adjustment. And on that, for instance, we've done some numbers. If we were, and the long and the short of it is, although we under a reasonable amount of pressure in the REM, we've said we will leave the numbers as they are and won't increase them. But Hannah can correct me, but if we were to adjust everybody to about 100% of the local government sort of REM, it would cost us around about 600,000. If we were to adjust it to the open market, and increasingly we find that people in our business transfer into all sorts of different sectors, it would cost us about $2 million. But in any event, the major increase was last year, and there was a pay equity adjustment of about $850. There were remuneration increases of about 930,000. There were new funding positions of 870 and the water stimulus funded positions of 150. And we went through and we estimated when we had done the analysis, I can't quite find the number, but from memory, it is around about, it's a bit less than, it's about 50% or a bit less that's funded from rates. The rest is funded from other sources. But the reason you're seeing that increase is that it is the increase adopted at the LTP last year accounts for almost all of it. So that would, the number for this year is, or what's the total REM for this year, 2022?
Sorry. Got that with me, right?
I've got it here, actually, I can tell you.
With me. So the personnel cost at the moment is tracking 16.8 year to date.
No, the actual budget number.
But the full budget is 23.8.
Yeah, 23.8.
Cool, thanks. Hannah, is there anything you want to add to that? I mean, there's a large piece of work going on behind some of that, obviously living wage, getting staff within X percentile of the benchmark local government index. Is there anything you, no, you're okay? I think we're all over that. Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, follow on, please, Councillor.
Yeah, just a quick follow up.
Yeah, no,
So,
definitely.
I was just going to say, so the increase this year is, I think, around about 4.something%. From,
Okay, that was going to be one of my questions. It
Yeah.
does also include any increases this year. And are all those positions filled that we did last year at the long-term plan?
no, not all of them at the moment, no.
Some of those are spoken to as we go through
Through,
the different
yeah.
groups as well in regard to maybe climate change position and some of those and some of the commentary. So we can probably pick up on some of those specific to group maybe as we go through and then maybe get comments from SLT as well. Thanks. Vic, any further questions? So we're all good on chat. Mr. O'Reilly, you're all good. See a beautiful picture of the new aviary out there as well. That's exciting. We'll go back to the team to continue.
Good morning. So we'll move on to section 2 on the draft capital budget. Before we dive into the numbers, I would like to provide a high-level introduction as to how was this capital budget prepared and reviewed. So as highlighted by my colleagues just this morning, the starting point for the capital budget for next year is year 2 of the long-term plan. So what we have done is we have taken year 2 of the long-term plan and we have reviewed it carefully in light of what we know based on the environment, but also to your point, Councillor Booth, we have also reviewed it based on what we know about this year. So we've looked at what do we have in the budget for this year in CapEx? What do we have planned for next year? And how do we look at those 2 years jointly so that we make sure that if there are things that we won't be able to deliver this year, we reflect that onto next year and it doesn't come at a later stage on top of an already significant capital budget. And so going through this process, we have come up to the results that I'm going to talk to you this morning. Before we move on, just on point 33, my apologies, the 71.1 million here should actually read 72.5. It's a minor difference, but I prefer to highlight it up front. So as highlighted in that section, we have a draft capital budget, which is 72.5 million, and this is the financial investment in our capital expenditure. So this number actually accounts for that 90% delivery assumption that we adopt as part of the long-term plan adoption. So work program is actually higher or bigger than that. It also includes downlands at 82%, which now that we are reaching the end of the major scheme upgrade for downlands, those 82% versus 100% will become less significant, but over the last couple of years, it was a very important point to note. So another thing that I really would like to highlight here is that we have been working in a challenging environment, but we have continued to deliver more every year. And the increase is actually significant. The annual report that we presented to you recently does highlight a capital expenditure of not this year, but the previous one of 59 million compared to a maximum of 32 in the past. In terms of, again, the financial parameters, the same inflation adjustment of 2.4% has been added to the base capital budget. And we have here a table on paragraph 38 that highlight where the expenditure is situated and a comparison with what we had planned in LTP year 2. As you can see, the total capital program, not the budget, but the program is amounting or is of a value of 80.5 or 80.6 millions in total. This again includes downloads at 82%. So looking back at what had we had in the plan for year 2 and what do we have now, what are we proposing? We have a 15.4 million variance. And I would like to take the time to go through and unpack what's behind that number. So out of the 15.4 million, we have approximately $12.4 million of projects that we initially budgeted this current financial year that we know now will be continuing and be fully delivered over the next 12 months or over the next financial years. So rather than leaving that aside for now, we have already put that into the budget. So when we look at it, we know what will be the total budget for next year. There are also a few additional projects that have been adding to the budget as a result of either a situation arising or previous decisions, and those are outlined there as well. So you will be aware of the landslip that happened at Caroline Bay as a result of a extreme weather event. So there is a need to remedy to that and to reopen there, and we have budgeted for that. The Caroline Bay central seating renewal has also been included in, and that project is ongoing and will carry on over the coming months. 2 bridges have also been identified as nearing the end of life, and the budget is reflecting the need to upgrade or renew those bridges. And then the Davison Road water main is a project that was kicked off as part of a 3 water stimulus. And the first section of the project has been and is currently ongoing as part of that program. So there is now a proposal to continue and complete the work that we have started there. And then we have also brought forward 2 projects, again, resulting from an assessment of the needs. And to compensate from those additions, we're also proposing to defer 4 projects for which the need may not be as high as of now, but also for which the deliverability may be questioned as of now based on the information that we have at hand. So now the big question is, can we do all of this? It is, again, an ambitious work program. And as you know, we are continuing to push for increasing our delivery capacity. I think our previous performance does reflect that the work is ongoing. We are also forecasting to spend between 75 and 80 million at year end. This number is constantly being updated and reflected. So again, maybe to your point, Councillor Booth, we are starting this week a process of reforecasting at year end based on the 9 months results. And so as we go along, we will have a better and a firmer understanding of exactly where we will land. In terms of, again, the feasibility of this, and we have talked about it, and it is, we wish we had the crystal ball and we could know how all of the factors and uncertainty will play for us in the coming months. We don't, but we are reasonably comfortable that we're balancing the risk, because if you look on paragraph 43, we know as of today that a majority of our work program will be contracted before we actually enter the financial year. That gives us confidence. That being said, it's also a requirement because we also know that the regulatory environment and the planning of the project is taking longer and longer. So not only do we have that confidence, but we also know how important it is to make sure that a significant portion of our work program will be under contract by the time we reach 1st of July. So I will pause here and take any further question. Thank you.
Stu.
Thanks for that, Lily. Just a couple of questions. I wasn't aware of the retaining wall at Caroline Bay. Where did that fall over? About the old bluestone wall there. Okay, cool, thanks.
Oh, yeah. And Andrew will be able to provide some background on that.
Oh, yeah, that doesn't matter. I just wasn't aware of it. I guess I have some concerns. We put an additional 1.7 million into the sound shell. That's on top of the original 1.7.
Correct.
So it's doubled. We've got other big projects, and I know it was a wee bit complicated, but within these budgets, have we built anything in? Because, you know, I spoke the other day, Ashburton have put a hold on their library and council offices for materials, but are also saying it's expected to go up dramatically. I mean, I wouldn't like the rest of our projects to double in money value as well. So some of them we know are going to go over. Is that built into the budgets?
I think part of that's to the point that Steve made at the start. You go with information that you know now, and until you know differently, it's a bit of a hard one. Understanding that you want to forecast those increases as best as possible, but not an exact science, is it? But happy for the team to speak to that.
No, but I guess our ratepayers. Nigel.
Oh, sorry, yeah, Councillor Booth, can you just jump on there? Thanks.
I guess our ratepayers, to be fair, expect us to be rigorous, and capital projects doubling in what we tell they are and what they end up being can make people nervous.
Oh no, totally. And taking into account that original budget was from some time ago, the Bleachers original budget, and we just discussed the increase to, I think the job, when we signed it off, what was it, 3.5, was it roughly, Nicole? Yeah, thank you. No, take your point though, Stuart, about being rigorous over this stuff. Yes, Big.
Yeah, look, it's a fair enough point, and it's a legitimate one as well, actually, Councillor Piddington. But I think what it does is reflect a time when actually we didn't have program delivery and projects managed the way we do now. And not only are you seeing a significant delivery increase, but actually the rigour that goes in by Lily and Azora's work and with the testing is actually seeing much more precise or much more accurate estimates. And the evidence there is the work that's getting delivered in terms of Downlands and Pariora that actually are fitting very much within the scope of what was projected to be done. So there's some of those legacy projects, they're getting delivered, they are costing more, which does of course make people nervous, and all too often you hear it. But what I would say is that the projects that particularly those initiated out of the last LTP, the one we adopted sort of 19 months ago, have a lot more rigour to them, which I think will give everybody much more confidence. And that rigour's right through the whole process, which is partly why we're delivering more as well now.
Yes, Steve.
Yep. The other thing that I'd add as well, Councillor Piddington, is we're not necessarily seeing the flip side. So there's a balance to this because there are a number of projects and a lot of stuff that's happened in Andrew's space that has actually come in under budget as well. So there's that whole, there's a balance that's going on here. We'll win some and we'll lose some, just with the vagaries of what's going on at the current time.
Yeah, you raise a good point. Oh, sorry, Councillor Piddington, jump in.
If that's the case, Steve, it'd be good to have those fed through this forum as well, because all ratepayers see is money going out. If we have a few wins, let's celebrate them as well.
Yep, totally agree.
Yeah, those discussions have been raised of later in and around that point, Stu.
Lily's got some that she can probably name that have come in, haven't you, under budget?
Projects coming under budget. Yeah, well, it is definitely coming, and you will see those in the 9 months performance report that will be presented to you in just a couple of weeks' time from now. That will be highlighted, and we will discuss also the impact that it has for a program going forward. Absolutely.
Cool, thank you. Just a couple of questions. The Davison Road one, that would have been actually in the LTP at some point, or would it have just been sitting within asset management plans as such?
It would have been, but probably much later in time.
Like, yeah, significantly, yeah. That's cool. Another question, Washdyke Industrial Road upgrade, what's that? That refers to, which road's that, Andrew, is that?
Yeah, that's the new link road that was between Meadows and Seadown Road.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we've still got developing the business case to get Waka Kohahi funding for that. So that's the reason for the deferral.
Right, no worries. And so reasonable to be in the next financial, it might be in the next couple. It's hard to know. Pinpoint. Yep, that's cool. And then my final question just around projects and delivery. I know the Geraldine Street, the Geraldine Siphon has been in there for some time. Is that realistic that we'll achieve that in the next financial year? Yeah, Because, understandingly, it's a complicated project.
It is a complicated
Yeah.
one, mainly
Yeah.
due to, again, regulatory environment, the bats, the lizards. Brian, if you want to add on that, but I think we are getting to a point where it's getting close to getting to market.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, you gotta love it. Okay, cool. Gotta love a lizard and bat management plan. Okay, cool. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Councillor Booth.
I guess it was probably further on from Stuart's question. Do you build into sort of like an escalation factor into all your projects based on the age and the projection of the date? So instead of considering a real number now, do you consider a real number and then add an escalation value on every year?
Yeah, it's a bit of a crystal ball one, that one. So what I can talk to is the 2.4% inflation piece, but we also have contingency on top of that. So that's within each project, you will have that contingency that you can apply to that. Escalation, we're not dealing with specifically, if you like, we're taking that as we go, because we still have options of actually changing materials and all that sort of stuff as we go forward. So yeah, my short answer is we're taking that on the 2.4 BERL increase and then any contingency contained in the project funds.
Thank you. We need the officers to work hard, so we don't want to give them too much cash in the system, otherwise they might go out there and use it. So where are we at? Any further questions? Okay, on Zoom there. Keep working through.
All good.
Thanks. So now we'll go to the operating budget. So effectively, we looked at a very high level just before in the summary, and I'd just like to go through the four main categories that make up the operating budget. So of course, we've got the personnel costs, operating costs, finance costs, and the depreciation and amortization. Of these four categories, the other expenses, which probably had the majority of the increase, is 1.6, and that has gone up from 45.85 to 47.5 million. Majority of this and the finance, sorry, we'll go into the detail in a bit. So the finance costs we spoke to slightly before, and that's 86,000, the increase, and the depreciation is just a modest 45,000, as you can see in there. Majority of the assumptions that we used for, obviously, the depreciation and the finance costs we touched on earlier. So the finance cost is based on the current trends and the inflations, and the depreciation is a result of the change in the capital. And when we look at the other operating expenses over on the next page, so point 51, we have a handful of items that actually make that up. So 950,000, which we touched on, was the waste levy increase, so that we don't have control over, $10 per tonne it's going up by. And the economic development and grant, that is 500 per year as per the council resolution late last year. The sewer oxidation pond expenditure, that's 500K, and that relates to a rebudget from 2022 year. And the last one there, which makes up the key variance, is the street landscapes maintenance contractor. So that is 200K above. So offsetting those variances, we do have some savings in there, which is from insurance savings. So 630K based on the projected current premiums. And also we've got the capitalization of projects, which is 430 coming through internal charges. At a high level, going to personnel costs, we have kept it very much so at LTP, as we spoke before. Effectively, we've got the 24.7 mil, and as we looked at just earlier as well, we're tracking to that at the moment. There is a bit of a vacancy going because of the trends, and that is as per the current forecast as well. The operating expenditure in terms of the other operating, it's basically the details we're happy to go through in a little bit shortly, but we will go through by unit, and where the managers are quite happy to take questions around that. There are quite a bit of variances here and there, but we can take separately. And we've just spoken about finance costs, but if anyone has questions around that, I'm happy to take that.
Councillor Booth.
You just remind me, what's our year? When does it go from to?
June.
1 July.
1 July.
This is 16 million is what we're currently at personnel costs. We've only got 3 months to go.
Correct, yes. So we've got a vacancy factor at the moment tracking at about 6% year to date right now. Last month it was about 11%, roughly, to give you an indication.
So we're 11% below tracking.
Last month, yes, and this month is 6%. Yes, so just an indication of the movement month to month.
Thank you.
Councillor Piddington.
Just a question, Azora, you probably won't answer, but someone could. The increase amount collected for the government waste subsidy increased by 10 per tonne, partially offset by an increase in fees and charges, and the balance through a targeted waste rate. Are we not putting that charge just on the user, or are we spreading that across other people, if that makes sense?
Andrew can answer that, Councillor Piddington.
But basically, the increase we've levied is being charged to the user where they are dumping waste through the landfill and over the weighbridge. But of course, we have a significant component which is curbside collection, and waste is still subject to the waste levy for that as well. So hence that's the targeted rate proportion.
Yeah, that makes sense. Second question, sorry, I was just on this.
No, go for it.
The tree maintenance contract, extra 200K, is that a year contract or is that a multi-year contract? Because it seems
No, that's a multi-year contract. Actually, at the moment, it's 3 plus 2. Yeah.
Further questions? Just point of interest, it's fascinating the time that we spent on financial strategy and then trying to get our financing, guesstimate a financing cost for a 10-year plan, and then already it's out the window, isn't it? Just shows you how quickly things move. We'll pass back to the team.
Thank you. So we'll just pick up on the revenue side now. So in terms of the revenue, we spoke about the fees and charges being the majority of the variance, so 1.3 million. Majority of this, as we've just said on the cost side, is offset by the emissions trading scheme dollars increasing to $10 per tonne. Building consent fees has also gone up by 549K. And majority of the fees and charges we have covered off in the next section in a little bit of a table in terms of how that reflects through. So we can go into that if there's any questions, but I won't go through it line by line. In terms of the collection, some of them, obviously, there's been reduced factors because of COVID, so that's reflected right through as well. While some have gone up, there might not be the volumes expected. So that'll be why when you go through the individual unit budgets, while the dollar value has gone up, it's not necessarily going up for the whole unit because we're still projecting the COVID factors in there. So something to keep in mind. As set out in the strategy, conceptually, even though the operating costs less the revenue, you'll see there are offsets. However, when you look at the subsidies and grants as a total, that's also what impacts on the rating line on the unit levels as well. So another point to just keep in mind while you look at that. In terms of the fees and charges as well, sorry, the dividends, we just want to just make a note that that's as per the LTP. So we haven't changed that in the financials at this stage. Any questions on that? Okay, so did structure right? So you want to talk about fees? Okay, so if there's any questions around the fees and charges, I'll leave it to questions for unit managers.
I'll ask. How do you charge an extra 5% for the art gallery? How do you actually, how do you get money out of the art gallery to cover more salary? The charge, internal charge to yourselves.
So we do hire it out for, we also have considered a case of people wanting the reduction of group subscription.
Thank you.
Yeah, all those breakdowns are further on as far as that interesting point though. I think specifically around those fees and charges as we work through the later tables, I think we can anything that's raised like the camping grounds and the fishing huts, always exciting ones. We can debate those at the time.
What sort of base is the fishing huts coming from? Is that quite a low sort of lease, or is that just a general? What about rentals? Like we've got quite a few rentals. Is that in here?
Yeah, later on, I think we can probably work through those tables in the later tables as far as fees and charges. We can just work through page by page. It's probably easier. Thanks. So where to pass back? Yep.
So the last part we would like to discuss and is the rates impact. As we highlighted in the summary report, the current financials are at 4.9% increase as per the LTP. This rate change, there is a detail, some sample properties provided in the appendix, and you can see because of the rating base increase, the rates per property, it was actually obviously not going to be 4.9 per sample property, but we can go through any questions on those if you have. But the majority takeaway is because the rating base is increased, effectively you'll see reductions to that overall. Okay, I'll pass that over to Steve.
Thanks, Azura.
Okay, team, so we've probably got a choice here. We can start to go through the attachments now if you'd like, in terms of that, and then come back to the option section of the cover report.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I think we'll just work through and then come back. We'll probably get through this relatively quickly. Yeah.
Lily.
I don't want to suggest to anybody not to ask questions they might want, but what you might find most useful is where if we move to the actual activity section where we set out, I think it starts on page, the first one is the corporate overhead one on page 46, and that sort of sets out the revenues and then the expenses as they get presented in the financial statements. The funding impact statements are a requirement of legislation, but they don't really show, I don't think, quite the same granular detail that the other ones do in terms of splitting it between personnel costs and operating costs and so on to get that visibility. But happy to work through as you see fit. But you might find that starting at page 46, you get a better idea of the various activities.
Has anyone got any questions noted before that point? But otherwise, I think we'll move to that. Well, I've just got one question, and I probably for Grant, the fishing huts, the water treatment system 153,600. Is that Rangitata, and is that specifically to? I'm making an assumption that's out there, is it? No, that's all right. So there's 153,600 on page 25, which is a fishing hut water treatment system. Is that in regard to the Rangitata huts? Is it? Oh, sorry, Nicole. Oh, it's under you. Yes. Yeah, so what is the treatment, just because it is probably for the likes of Councillor O'Reilly and Councillor Lyon. Yep. So it's still working through options a little bit. So the filtration is that effectively to remove the nitrate if need be. It is because that's got, yeah, okay. So there's some cost in that. Okay, no, that's cool. Brilliant, thank you. So we'll move now to, as being suggested, to page 46. And did staff want to work through particulars, and we can fire any questions. So on 46, corporate overhead.
Any questions?
Yeah, we might just, I mean, we've all read this, so let's just look for questions if you like. So what I might do is start to work through, and if there's any questions, we will pick up individually. And sorry to Councillor Burt and Councillor O'Reilly on, that was just a question around fishing huts, so we can sort that out later as far as getting you up to date. But you should be able to hear us again now. So question from Councillor Booth.
Yeah, could someone just run through one of these and give me a clear definition of how these numbers flow?
Sure. So looking at the page 47, the explanations of the way that this is flowing is the key personnel costs, depreciation, finance cost, other expense in the box there. And for every unit, we've looked at the key variances on expenses. Obviously, the rate figure on each of those totals effectively offset each other. Therefore, we've focused on the variances to what makes up those differences.
What I mean was, if you go through page, say, for instance, 46, start at the top, LTP 2023, and give me this 3711 there, just work your way down that line and tell me. I know it says what it is, but I just want a clear understanding of how that works.
Sorry, just a
reflection on all of them.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so it just needs to, so I'd just like to be clear on my own mind what it's, and I'm sure if I'm struggling, everyone else is probably thinking, well, how does this look?
Sure. So looking at the revenue side, the corporate overheads, I guess, going to the key variances, and I'll talk both together because one offsets each other. And please do jump in with questions. So effectively, the personnel costs, which you see there, is the negative 1.6, which has the majority of the impact on this division. The reason for that is during the LTP, we've used a tool which applies the 8.5% vacancy factor right across the organisation into one unit. This is different to how the original budgets usually would have been set, and it is a reflection of the current times that we're in terms of recruitment and everything else, and officers feel this is a better, clearer way to manage as we go in a month-to-month basis. Effectively, so that negative has impacted on the total comprehensive revenue take for that group there, which offsets each other. So in terms of looking at the rate line, for instance, of the 6.1, that would be the total made up of the offsetting personnel costs, depreciation, financing costs, which is a decrease because of the allocated activity cost, which comes through as an overhead. And then the other expenses where we've got 447K variance. Majority of that comes through, the key variances are the superannuation of 335, insurance of 16, council building surveillance of 30, and council cleaning costs have also gone up by 10K, health and safety of 8K, and risk and assurance of 55K. So those key variances in the 447 that you see in the table make up that other expenses there.
Right. Yeah, no, okay, so maybe can I come back to that one and suggest we go and look at, because corporate overhead is probably the most tricky one, but if I go to community support group, which has a bit more than governance, because governance is really the function of supporting democracy and so on. But if I go to the community support group, and I'll come back to corporate governance, when council, we divide our activities, we divide what we deliver up into various activities, page 49. So we divide it up into activities. And the way we work is that rates, if you like, are the last source of funding. So when we work out how much an activity will cost us to run, we look at, it's an iterative process, but in this one here is, for instance, the airport. And so you'll note that in that activity, there are fees and charges. So that will include the landing fees we get at the airport. It includes the interment fees we pay, people pay for burials and so on. So we work out, we start and we say, what are the costs to run these activities? And we estimate the personnel costs are 337,697. And that's the labour, if you like, to people being at the airport, someone who's our emergency management team, the EMO, and so on. So that's the staff. The depreciation and amortization is the amount of depreciation allocated to the assets that run that activity. So like at the airport, one thing and another. There are finance costs because actually there are borrowings against some of those activities. So we have to put finance. Then we get to other expenses. And this is the sort of the area people go, well, what's going on in the big office at council? But all of those other expenses, that is, I think, where for instance, correct me Azura, but the electricity for running the airport, the person who goes and does the interment, does the contracting for the interment and so on. That's all of those expenses, and we can give you a list. They run to countless lines. And then the internal charges is effectively the overhead that is allocated to those activities.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So corporate overhead, that's like the IT. So the IT people, the property people who might help administer some of these facilities and so on, and someone such as myself, part of that overhead. So some of that is allocated to all of it. It comes and it says the total cost is 6.361 million, nearly, sort of 6.3 heading towards $6.4 million. And then we work out how do we fund that activity. And the activity is funded, I presume that other revenue is a selection of sort of interest and dividend and the like, is it, Azura?
Yeah, it's everything other than the three above, yes.
Yeah, other than the three above. The fees and charges are a big amount, and that's because you've got things like in the social housing, I presume that's the rentals we receive, it's the airport landing charge, it's the interment. So it's all of those fees and charges. And then the difference, what we don't collect, is funded by rates. And that amount of 614,497 at the bottom, that will be allocated for some capital work, I would think, we've got a surplus there of 471, and that I expect is allocated for capital work across some of those, because they should eventually they all run out to zero everywhere across the council, or or, oh no, it will contribute to the surplus, won't it? Yeah. So does that help with that, councillor Booth?
Yeah,
Yeah, and then
that's a big help.
Yeah, can I go back to the corporate overhead? Because that's a complicating one. This is like, never an easy one. But so with the corporate overhead, those other ones like that community services, that, what was it called? The community support group, that was able to be allocated to specific activities, airports, cemeteries, social housing, that sort of jazz. Not so easy though on the corporate overhead, because that is the people and capability team, it's the comms team, it's the customer service team who take the inquiries downstairs. And so that is all of the stuff that we can't allocate to a particular activity in council. And it is in a way, I guess it is the biggest activity in council because we do a lot of management of service delivery. But again, what we do is we estimate the costs to run the organisation. Now, what you'll note at the bottom there is there's a big credit against the internal charges. And that is the corporate overhead that goes out to the other parts. The portion for that community one that they bore of that was $388,479. So they all bear a portion. We then work out what is, and of course, we don't get subsidies and grants and corporate overhead and so on. So we have a higher rate proportion in order to run the business. I'm not sure if that sort of helps frame up. Yeah, okay. So that's what it does. And we do, and it's what makes budgeting in council quite a layered exercise, because Andrew, for instance, referenced when he was talking about the charge for the waste levy, that can't go through the general rate, because otherwise everybody, whether they contribute to that or not, is paying for it. So it's a targeted rate by the 3 bin rate, and that means those who receive that service pay and contribute to the levy. So this is the whole, and that's the revenue and financing policy that we go through, where we say how we should target the expenses and who should bear what. And another version of that is in the building control. I think it's about 80 to 90% we seek to recover from fees and charges. Your building application, X hundreds of dollars, so that those who are getting the benefit don't end up paying for it via, not everyone pays for it. It is quite a complicated model. Yeah, no, I'm very happy. Yeah, it would take quite a lot of writing down, but yeah. So does that, I hope that helps. I'm very happy to take questions. It's never easy understanding how council finances work, but that's broadly how all of these activities operate. I'm happy to take questions on it as we go through, because you might get more questions as we run through it.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get activity specific. So everyone, anyone want to ask any questions around corporate overhead?
It might be almost easier to come back to corporate overhead right at the end.
Yeah, we can.
Because it's kind of like the wash up of all the others. You might find that easier actually to raise it at the end, don't you, Worship?
Yeah, look, and there's some really good explanatory notes as well. So there's a lot covered in that. So we'll move now to maybe page 48, governance group operating budget. So is there any questions specific to that one? And Patty and Pete, if you've got any questions in regard to this question, just put on your mics and chip in.
Cheers, will do.
Cool. So we'll move on forward. So community support group budget, which was talked to before. All okay. And officers, if there's anything specific that you want to highlight, please jump in as well. Move now page 51, which is environmental services group operating budget. Just a question from me. Personnel expenditure, we had an overall increase. So we had reductions from district plan review, but then increases from district planning. So that increases from district planning.
So my understanding of that is it is in exchange for consultants. They're looking at hiring additional resource to reduce the consultant use.
Okay.
Paul, I'm not sure if you've got.
Yeah, that's right, Your Worship. We're currently running lean on planners in particular. So we have 2 planners doing consents in-house. We probably need 4 minimum. And so we've got 6 or 8 consultants that we're managing, which is gassing up time of one of the planners who's managing those. So it's those fees, the difference between the charge out rate of what we charge internally for a planner and what a consultant is charging is what's adding to that cost that you're seeing there. Yeah.
The idea being we increase our number of people we employ and reduce the consultants. So the intention is an offset by reducing the consulting costs and increasing the cost, because the personnel costs, because we put in some extra planners in, and some extra, for a short period of time, some extra building control officers as well, in order to manage through some succession planning. So it's quite important we keep our cohort of building control officers up to date. Otherwise, when irons come on their 2-yearly cycle, biennial cycle, will be found wanting.
That over investment in our own staff would actually be cheaper in the long run anyway, would it not, rather than versus consultants?
Yeah.
That's right, Your Worship. Yeah. It's a, as we know, planners are like hen's teeth at the moment, so it's a difficult area to recruit for, but we are actively recruiting, trying to reduce that amount.
Yeah. No, we recognise there's challenges in that space.
The other part of it too, and particularly in building control, what we can't do is, while we might be able to get someone to do the work, we hold and retain responsibility and liability for the quality of the work. And it's really important in some of those areas, particularly around building control, that we have really good prudential supervision over the quality of what's been undertaken. And last year, sometime there was or it might have been late the year before, but in the last 12 months or so, there was quite a concerted effort by a number of private firms to lure people away from the building control authorities so that they could get it outsourced. But we hold that in-house. It's part of maintaining quality control as well as investing and having the resource available.
Cool. Councillor Piddington.
So can we have those numbers again? How many consultants did you say we had in planning? Not, Councillor Piddington, not in planning. I'm saying that we have 2 in-house planners who process consents. I'm saying it'd be nice to have 4, and we're actively recruiting at the moment. So roughly, if you have an in-house planner can do with about 50 consents as a rough rule of thumb in a year. We're obviously I think we pull out about 300. The figures that we've written there here. So yeah, about 300 consents in a year. So that difference is we have to use external consultants to process those for us. We have about 6 or 8 on our books that we go to with those consents for processing. But obviously, there's a quality control aspect to that and a management component of that, which further reduces the ability of in-house staff to process consents. So we're in a place where we're trying to rebuild the numbers at the moment, reduce our reliance on those consultants, and get more in-house planners. Roughly, by using consultants, is that double what it is to have a staff member? I'd say most consultants charge out at about $180 an hour. Our internal charge out rate, which is what we pass on to the customer, is $150. So the difference is roughly about a third. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Booth.
Yeah, so what that costs? So roughly it's probably 3 times our cost. Would that be fair to say? So from employing our own in-house planner and paying a consultant, it triples our cost for that consent. Would that be-
Thanks. I mean,
Yeah, it's probably it's a third. So because we've adopted a position that we don't pass on that cost to our customers. I'm sorry, I may not have been speaking through the microphone then. Because we're not passing on that cost to our customers, and that was a decision by council some years ago, that we just charge out what it would cost if we had in-house resource. That means that we wear that difference, which is about 30%.
So that would include the corporate overhead and all the other overheads, though, wouldn't it?
The 100, yeah.
130.
The 135 includes recovery of corporate overhead, etc.
yeah.
Yes, that's correct, because the planners don't get paid out at that. No, it includes it's the recovery of the corporate overhead as well. Correct. Okay.
and we'll get an idea to that when we go through fees and charges specific to that group as well. But recognising that it's a pretty challenging space and it's not not an overnight fix, although you do have a plan. So, yes.
Sorry, I missed a lot of that, unfortunately, because of the speakers and things. Did we have context though? Because I missed the thread, but the context for the fact that every single regional and district council are in the same boat, all of them vying for the same positions, can't get staff, can't maintain them, can't control them, and they're all going to consultants anyway. So we're in an invidious position. That's just the environment we're working in.
Yeah, look, it was pretty much covered, Councillor Burt, in that regard. Yeah, challenging space,
Yes.
and we're competing, and that would extend through to probably building control to a lesser extent as well.
Look, my understanding is that the MFE, and I can't remember the numbers, but Ministry for the Environment has upped significantly the number of planners it has in Wellington, which has put the strain on everybody else, and their way, they are paying pretty attractive remuneration as well. It's a challenging environment.
Councillor Binton.
Vee, do we have any other areas in council that we have the same concerns and the same number of consultants operating?
No, not in that way to make up the cohort, although Andrew's team does engage his group does engage a number of consultants, but it tends to be specifically for design, because we wouldn't hold that skill in-house to do a particular design on Grant could talk further, or Susie on roading, but we wouldn't necessarily hold all of that. This is a problem that has emerged with the in planning in particular, a lesser extent building, but planning in particular has emerged because of the demand for planners in areas such as the Ministry for the Environment, and then that has also generated demand with the increased economic activity out in the planning community, so not to the same extent. So we're working quite hard to resolve that issue.
Thank you. Councillor Wills.
Thank you. Just in regards to the cost offsetting, we're obviously holding that internal within the council, and we are aware that other councils throughout New Zealand have similar problems and issues, but are they also holding the costs internally as well, or are they sharing them out? Have we looked at some comparisons?
Yeah, there'd be a variety of approaches, I would imagine.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Wills. I think our sort of provincial and smaller councils certainly operate on the model that we've got, where overspill goes out to consultants. So I don't think that's uncommon. The amount that goes out to consultants will vary from council to council. That decision to only charge the customer 130, or what we charge internally, it probably relates to the equity of the situation, that it's not the customer's fault that we haven't got in-house planners who can do that work. So I can understand the rationale behind it, but it is something that we'd be keen to bridge that gap when we do get an opportunity. Unfortunately, with the RMA, it's not quite as simple as just putting the fees up through the annual plan process. There does have to be
a consultation. So we may look at that in the near future, bring that to council if council would like to bridge that gap.
Councillor Booth, thanks, Councillor Booth.
So I guess we probably should be immortalising those costs across the board. So what the consultants are costing us, plus the mix of our own people to come up with the real cost of and reflect that in our fees and charges. Should that not be right, how it's done?
The balance is, councillor Booth, that is trying to, because at 135 we probably do recover for it's when we're using internally, because it includes the overhead. The balance is trying to get that number right when some is out and some is in, because we will always brief some consents out for a variety of reasons. It might be the complexity, it might be a perceived conflict of interest or something like that. But at 135, we would recover if we are paying if it is done internally. So it's sort of how you then blend on a weighted average, what is the cost recovery when some is done internally and some is done externally. And that's the tricky part, is where the seesaw balance is.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Immortalise the costs across the, your percentage might be 50-50, but in that you'll have a midpoint of around $155, $160, which is actually a true cost, having used the consultants.
Yeah, and your true costs will change based on internal staff at the time. But we might just pick that up and specific to that fees and charges as well, and put it away then. So, look, conscious of time, we might just have a 10-minute break now for those that need it. We'll try and get back at 10 past being on, and then we'll pick up from where we are now. Thanks.
Now, priorities.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, don't have to pass the mic. Don't drop it.
You're doing really well there.
Alrighty, is that? Oh, Councillor Oliver, that's right. He's in the background there. Alrighty, we'll kick back in. I remember as a 5-year-old, told the story a few times. A lot of the girls wanted to be princesses, and a lot of the boys wanted to be firemen. And I, of course, wanted to be the Prime Minister. Haven't quite got there, but that's okay. But it's how we get the 5-year-olds to want to be planners and involved in building control. That's it. Lots of Lego. Okay, right, perfect. We need to start selling them on it early, don't we? We'll move back into the documents in front of us. So I think we're at recreational leisure group. Assuming everyone's okay with, I think we've kicked well through environmental services. We'll pick some other of those points up in fees and charges that were raised. Any questions specifically to this group? And we've obviously taken libraries, art galleries, and lots of activities, swimming pools, etc. in this. So I note just point of interest, reduction in electricity across pretty much all groups. Could someone just speak to maybe that point just so we can cover that off?
Yes, so we have done an assessment against the electricity projections, and the officers have looked through all of the statements and done an in-depth analysis for this budget round, and that's where we've found those savings right across.
Fantastic. It's not our good friends at Alpine putting down the line charges or anything, no.
There's a component, especially coming through roads and stuff, where we're seeing the return on putting LEDs in versus sodium chlorides. So it's good to see that stuff coming through.
Yeah, cool. That's a good point. Councillor Burt, did you have a?
No question. Sorry.
No, sorry. It's all right. Good to see you in tune though, Councillor Burt. Don't have a granddad joke or anything for us while we've got you on.
I was concerned that the only emergency service you used there before was the fire service.
Moving on, so no questions from there, so we'll move now to page 55, which is roading and footpaths operating budget. So if you look to points on 56, is there anything? Slow me up. So 56 is, I'll go, the page I'll tell you will be actually where the explanatory notes are. I do quite like the notes. They're pretty informative actually. Councillor Pennington.
Actually, on those other expenses notes, can they just all of them actually that have increased? Can we just have them, parking facility, why was maintenance? Was that unscheduled maintenance for 179K?
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
perfect. Thanks.
Page 56.
It's just the list of things.
Okay. So yeah, the parking facility one is actually some repair work that needs to be done at the farmers car park. There's some concrete cracking and some concrete is falling off there, actually exposing the reinforcing. So it's more of a cosmetic thing than a structural thing, but it needs to be done. Otherwise, yeah, it will become more serious in the future as the steel gets corroded. The trees, the landscape tree maintenance, that's following on from the street trees, and that's the expected increase in costs regarding that contract.
Yeah.
And community programs event, that's to do with road safety. So we're looking at increasing our road safety education. Most of that is funded by Wakatahi. So it's although it's showing as gross cost here, the net cost is a lot less than that. And yeah, road seal pavement maintenance, pavement maintenance is always an issue. It's always a challenge. We've been fighting against it. So we have increased the level of service marginally there. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew.
Councillor Booth.
Just on that, have we made any, have had any consideration for installation of EV parks in some of our parking areas? Because that's obviously something that we need to think about.
We haven't made any allowance for EVs, EV parking. No, we see that at the moment as more of a private, in private car parks and the EV charging there, because at the end of the day, there's varies on the charging side of things and the infrastructure that's needed.
We own all the car parks though. They're all our car parks. So it's fairly logical that they'd be in our CBD, in our car parks.
Yeah, did you want any more comment on that, Andrew?
Yeah, we have put the EV chargers in at the airport. That's one particular place we're using them. But we haven't really been approached to put them anywhere else, and said other like supermarkets and that are tending to go into that EV charging market, yeah, rather than the public car parks.
But so as far as we're doing parking strategy and some other things, sitting under, well, in line with City Hub, and there'll be some. I mean, that'll probably be a conversation that should be incorporated in that. Do you think?
Yeah, it's certainly a conversation that can be had in the CBD Hub, and yeah, certainly, and that of course has the parking strategy incorporated with that.
Yeah, I mean that would make sense for us to be discussing it.
But the focus has been on parking, is for parking rather than for charging of vehicles, which is seen more as the fuel for vehicles. Yeah.
Yeah, and interesting is I think Z stations are starting to provide EV charging stations. Just don't want to park behind one. Councillor Wills.
Thank you. Yeah, I know we've discussed this with CBD stuff as well, but I'm along with Councillor Booth. I think we've got to make sure that we keep this at the forefront of our thinking. Yeah, we've got to be innovative and creative. We don't want to be left behind. That if we are looking at our car parking facilities, we've got to start future-proofing them and encouraging people to ensure that we can actually move with the times. So I'm a bit worried that if we don't have this there at the forefront of our thinking and development, it is going to be forgotten. We're going to leave it up to private enterprise to actually install these things outside of the inner city. And then, of course, we're going to lose the initiative where we've got these spaces available now. So it'd be good to get a report back on that at some stage.
Thanks, Councillor Wills. Councillor Booth.
Yeah, considering we're halfway between Dunedin and Christchurch, and the logical place to stop is in Timaru, we'd probably like to think they'd stop in the CBD. So they're probably not that keen to stop at the airport. Spend an hour waiting.
No, look, a point well made. I think it's something we need to discuss within parameters of. Yeah, go for it.
Through you, Your Worship, then can we ask for a report around it and just see what the actual development and process is going to be, so it's at the forefront of the thinking of our leadership group?
So if there's already been work done on it, as far as that parking strategy, does that take into account any EV thinking at this stage, or can we add it to that as opposed to do a separate report? I mean, to me, it's tied. I would have thought that that's the same space that we're going to be using. Andrew.
Yeah, I know that the parking strategy of the draft is looking at EV charging, but yeah, I don't know anything more further than that, but it will certainly be taken into account. One of the issues we also have, of course, is the appropriate infrastructure regarding the actual electric energy supply. Is it available? And the CBD is one of those areas where Alpine is still upgrading the energy. You need some pretty substantial transformers to cope with these EV charging stations.
Cool. Further, Ian?
Meridian have up until the end of June this year quite a few $1.5 million left over to help councils put infrastructure in. They obviously have to sign up to an access agreement, which means that if they pull out early, that the council would need to pay. They will finance it up to the tune of $35,000 per installation of 4 chargers. That's basically, obviously, they'll take a schematic of the town and they know where the energy is, and they'll recommend certain locations, and then basically the council don't have to spend a cent. So there are those it has been offered to our council, but it hasn't been taken up.
So unit costs of around 35k, yeah?
4 chargers.
For 4? Really? So they're relatively cheap if the infrastructure's there. But the infrastructure's the key element, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. They will put they simply want an access agreement, and if you change your mind prior to 10 years, there's an incrementation of the money of the outlay, which decreases every year, and after 10 years, it's completely gone.
Yeah. So, I mean, my point around the cost is actually, if we incorporate it as part of the strategy, it's something potentially we could pick up ourselves and not have to partner. That might be infrastructure that we are looking to provide if the cost is relative, and working with the likes of Alpine might be nice collaboration potentially. taking the point that it's important to members of council that we move this forward. So I think the key thing is that we're over this in regard to the parking strategy, incorporate it within that. Is everyone comfortable with that? And then I'll go to Councillor and then Councillor Piddington. Thanks.
Following on from that, Nigel, if we're going to be leaders in the environment, we should be looking at our own fleet over time. It should be something in the budget, whether we're leasing them or buying them. But if we're expecting other people to do it, we should be taking a lead role.
Yeah, and we did, I think the last time, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, perhaps just before this, maybe the last council, we did review policy, etc., around fleet, and conscious that we've got about a dozen hybrids in the fleet. Is that correct? But it's something we should be reviewing versus cost, and understanding the uptake locally, demand, and also future technologies as they're coming through as well. Yeah, covered everything. But point well made. So let's go back now to, we didn't get off track at all, but that's good. The opportunity with everyone in the room is a great opportunity to be able to put questions out there. So where do we get to? Any further questions on page 56? We've covered the major expenses. So if we move now to waste minimisation, and the notes are on page 58. So we've talked to some of this before, increase of waste levy, etc. So I think probably well covered, unless there's any other specific questions. Excuse me. So I'll keep moving, go to now to page 60, which is the exciting stuff. The sewer group operating budget. So I think if Three Waters goes ahead, we won't be able to get into the detail here, will we? Hey? So a personnel expenditure decrease of I guess it's an individual. Is that a role we need to fill again? Or is that? Personnel expenditure down by 108k. Is that role specific or? No, look, it's neither here nor there. It's just for my own.
Yeah, I think that reduction in the personnel expenditure is just reallocation, and the fact that we're catalysing salaries a lot more.
Okay.
Now. Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. So what? Just in case. So what happens is quite a bit of the work in the sewer unit is on capital work. So some of that labour, if you like, or personnel cost gets charged into that capital work rather than as an operating expense.
Yeah, cool. That makes good sense. Move through now to stormwater, page 62 is the notes. Not really a lot there. I think we're probably okay. Page 63, 64 now, so we'll move to water supply. No, all pretty good. Sorry, pull back on the. And do we want to go through the tables at all? Oh, yeah, we've got rates here. That's important. Got to make sure we get Pleasant Point right, Councillor Lyon. So maybe someone could take us through the tables in regard to rates specifically. So we're on now, page 65, and we've got the tables in regard to the specific rates affecting the specific, the individual communities. Have you got your, if you bring it up on your iPad's important for this one, as far as the Zoom. Stu might have a big magnifying glass he can lend you as well. In PAXs, or if you just given it, I know we've seen these tables before at LTP, but if you just give a wee explanation, and then we can look to follow through on the specific rates that are affecting.
Sure. So just in terms of the sample properties that you have in front of you, the way that we've just derived these are sort of going at various levels within the ranges. So some of them are approximately 50% or 75%, depending on the assessment in terms of where they sit. So obviously we've just identified some sample properties to give an idea. The rates obviously are based on the land valuation. So we take the land valuation into consideration, and then we've applied the UAGC general rates, and then the various sewer wastewater rates across it. So we're taking each one, and then the bottom there, what we've compared it to is obviously what the current is compared to the new budget. And for that particular property, how much is the increase in rates per dollar value, as well as the increase for the weekly, just to give a rough idea of where that would sit at. Now, right at the back of the tables, you do have a small box there that show the proportion change. So you may recall during the LTP, we talked about the pie allocation, and that's
So it's on page 70.
Sorry, yes, page 70. How does that proportion between the commercial, residential and primary sit in relation to all of the assessments? So you can see there in terms of how we were going against the LTP, it's actually all roughly there or thereabouts. So effectively what we're saying in that graph or the table is that the proportions have remained fairly the same, remembering that the LTP year was the valuation year, and therefore the year one of the LTP was where the effectively the highest increases were, and now we're back into track until the third year comes back around at a high level. Yeah, happy to take any questions in the detail.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be some questions, but so just a question from me, if we go to page 68, which is Pleasant Point, and if we go to primary directly, which is 6% as far as rates increase, we had some real extremes out there with values and property increases. Excuse me. Are we likely to still see some of those anomalies based on extreme land values? Do you think, have we done some of that analysis on individual properties? Just because I know that we had some that, you know, really peaked.
So for the purpose of this, we've just looked at the sample properties in front of us, but definitely we'll be doing more at the adoption stage. Once the numbers are locked in, then it'll be more nearer. Yeah, but we didn't see any high outliers right across the board, because the differential proportions, as you saw, was relatively there or thereabouts, up or down in that last table. Therefore, across the board, it's pretty much similar to the sample properties we've identified.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's probably, if we do see that information around those outliers prior to adoption, would be key. Any further questions? Are you comfortable with that, Councillor Lyne? Because I think that's it. I'll jump on
the changes, isn't it, with the footpaths and those sort of things. Haven't that affected it, Andrew, or is that still coming through or not? No? Oh, well, just, you know, it reads interestingly a point going 5666 as opposed to others, but I thought the explanation was that you were bringing in Pleasant Point Cave and Paraora into the urban district-wide footpaths and so forth, and that would have a knock-on effect. Is that the reasoning why points are a little higher than others, or am I wrong?
No, that went through last year.
So
with the, so we basically footpaths are covered under the one general rate now. So yeah. No.
So that's not the answer then. Okay.
You know, they're just slightly higher in point. It might just be the premium.
Yeah, the year must be good out there.
Yeah, I think it's now that you've got a pub actually.
Yes.
Get rid of the pub, Richard.
Yes.
You're too proactive in supporting our community.
We'll work on that. We'll work on that. Yeah, okay.
Is there anything specific, team, around those numbers? No, comfortable with that. We'll move forward then. So we're going to page 71, which is draft fees and charges. And what we'll do is just work through page by page. It is small print, so you might want to iPad it. And there again, we'll just work through the specific charges. And then officers too, if there's anything you want to highlight specific to this, please just jump on in. So airport, pretty self-explanatory. Some changes obviously there. They're a good bunch, the airport users anyway, so I'm sure you won't have any comments about increased fees at all.
Just a note there that Air New Zealand is negotiated separately as a commercial arrangement.
Yeah, that's cool. Then page 75, we've got animal dog control. Zip through to art gallery, which is page 78. Then Cara talked to some of those. I think Councillor Booth had that question earlier. So interesting, some of the things that they do. Interesting to note that, of course, that the student research is free. So I'm sure that gets used a fair bit for school projects. Bottom of 79, you've got assignment of other leases. Not really a major for us, I don't think. Building control services. Paul, is there anything you want to highlight?
Not particularly, Your Worship. We're just trying to catch up on some costs that haven't been increased in the past.
Yep. We'll move through now to page 84, which is cemeteries. Price is only going to go up, so get in early. Councillor Piddington.
Well, it's not a big one, but I am amused. Page 82, amusement device charges, $11.50. I mean, I don't know what that's for, but it's pretty cheap. But can someone give me an explanation when all the rest of the fees are around 200?
Yeah, it's not. I don't think that one's under the Building Act, Councillor. I think that's under the Amusement Devices Act of 1856 or something, and it's charged accordingly. But when people do arrive and erect some sort of amusement device, we go out and inspect and just make sure it's got that minimum safety in terms of the structure, if you like.
So, Paul, that's my point though. For someone to drive down there, spend an hour down there, and we're charging $11. Seems ridiculous. Is that set by legislation, or is that what we're doing?
I don't have it to the front of mind. I'm sorry, Councillor Piddington. I did have it at one point. My rough recollection is we do one or two a year. The Act may have something to do with it. I'd have to go back and get back to you on an email.
Yeah, so some of them are set by legislation, and I'd have to check. In actual fact, they're a real risk for us because it is not a certification that they meet a certain standard. It's a problem for us in a number of ways, mostly around the risk attaching to those devices. So I think people assume that that means they are completely safe and fit for purpose. It means that they're secured properly and attached to whatever they're meant to be, but it doesn't make a representation about the actual structure itself, is my understanding.
That's right. It's just about some really basic checks that they're secured to the ground. So, for example, if there was a weld that failed during operation and there was some accident, we wouldn't have found that or known about that. And there's some question mark over what risk there is to us or what exposure we've got around that. So that is a problem. Yeah.
The analogy I give is of a motor car. You can check that it's got 4 tyres, but you don't know how well the brakes are maintained and the steering column and all that sort of stuff.
I guess it should be more than $11.50 then.
Councillor Bush.
So are we talking about like an amusement down at Caroline Bay over the summer period?
Okay, we'll leave that with the team to give some in-depth thought to. Back to cemeteries. Everyone comfortable with that? Take that one line down. It was for Councillor Burt since he's not here. Infrastructure group admin fees.
Very nice.
Could be standing up.
As long as you're facing the church, Councillor O'Reilly. Move now to, I'm on page 88, which is facility hire, starting with Alpine Energy Community Centre out at Timaru, and I know there's just some subtle wee increases throughout these facilities, so nothing major, but if anyone's got any questions, I think there was some specific increases around the full, what looked like a large increase around the full hire for the likes of Aorangi, but still relatively nominal, I believe. So 89 Aorangi Pavilion, Caroline Bay Lounge on page 90. Caroline Bay Hall on page 91. Caroline Bay Sound Shell 92. Move now to Geraldine for the Geraldine Pavilion, page 93. Pleasant Point Hall, page 94. I note the big increase if you're hiring after midnight. Got a premium of another $2 per hour. I know, it's an incentive to cut off your party at 12 o'clock, isn't it? Southern Trust, sorry, I talked to this a little bit earlier, which is page 96. Any Q&A on that one? Next page, 97, Timaru, and then a lot of income coming from the theatre at the moment. So then we move now to Washdyke, which is 99, Washdyke Community and Sports Centre, same sort of theme. Page 100 is West End Hall. Just for interest's sake, actually, it would be interesting to get a report, and it doesn't have to be in depth, but just around the usage of some of these facilities. It would be interesting to know versus understanding, I guess, the money that we do potentially have to put into some of these, especially the earthquake building specific ones. So there's no urgency, but it would be of interest. Councillor Parker.
And I was thinking something similar with COVID, and a lot of these facilities haven't been hired out probably now for 2 years regularly. How much of an impact will that have in the next 18 months, 2 years to maintenance and work and upgrades that we've lost that revenue during the pandemic? Just to, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I noted in there, I mean, if you look at those income streams from the hireage, they are very much community facilities, which are largely subsidised by general rates. So very much providing a community specific product. So the income that we haven't been receiving isn't huge on the scale of things, but still interesting to note, and possibly more so around that usage point as opposed to the direct income.
Yeah, make a resolution. It'd be pre and post COVID would be interesting as well.
Yeah, we can tidy that up at the end. I know some people have made some notes though, so I'm on 101, which is fishing huts leases, and obviously that's for land specifically. Councillor Piddington.
Just on that, Nigel, I know we're going to spend 150k or something on water. How many huts are at Rangitata, and should the leases reflect the services, or are we charging for services on top of those leases? If someone can give me an explanation there.
Yeah, we're not really providing a whole lot out there. Nicole, are you able to give an update on that one?
Just with the Rangitata leases, my question is, we're increasing it by less than 5% cost of the lease, but without spending 150k upgrading your water. Where does that get charged, or how does that get charged?
Oh, sorry, Councillor Booth, can you just put your mic back on? And yeah, Nicole, come up and share the stage.
I was just writing down some notes as you were. So the Rangitata huts along with Strathione, they're actually charged out, and we derive an income that we save over time, so they sort of become quite cost neutral. There has been a little bit of extra in the funds of late to look at water, but yes, we've had to increase. But over the next 3, 4, 5 years of the leases, we will increase that cost when the spend happens and recoup that over time. So they usually run at a regular increase every year, and certainly every 3 years, and it's cost neutral. So they're very aware that any maintenance costs regards the infrastructure support will be paid for, sometimes upfront by the council, recouped over time through the charges to them. So yeah.
What is the number of huts out there? Does anyone know offhand? Would it be?
So about 150
Oh,
plus,
yeah.
and we have a 15% of that group that are allowed to stay there 365 days a year. The remainder are only supposed to use for 180, but we do have some that stay a little bit longer.
Supposed to.
But actually policing that's quite difficult too, because it's a long way. But they maintain the fire and any emergency activities out there. So there's actually that group are quite strong in looking after that community, as well as then the campground next door.
Yeah. Councillor Burt. And then I'll go Councillor Riley after that.
Sorry, I've got a question.
Oh, no, sorry, it's that one that's being used. That's why I'm getting I'm tricking myself. My apologies. Councillor O'Reilly.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Yeah, sure. The with the Rangitata huts, the locals or the permanents are there. They tend to manage not so much manage who stays, but keeps an eye on people that are coming and going for their own, their own benefit. It's sort of a bit of self-policing going on out there. So I think if anything does get out of hand, they usually let someone know that that some undesirables or too many people are staying there too long. So it's a little bit of self-policing out there. They are a strong group out there that are pretty well organised. So they do look after their own area very well.
Thanks, Councillor O'Reilly. Yeah, should be a talking point of the village if someone was staying there as a permanent, but only paying the semi-permanent lease. I would imagine could be quite the conversation. Moving now through to Lim. That's all pretty okay. That's probably set outside of council, I'm assuming, is it? Oh no, sorry, Lim isn't. So that's us, yeah. But that's unchanged.
Yeah. Largely, we've changed our process quite a lot around that, and it's reduced the cost significantly. One thing we have to be careful of here is that the act that governs us is quite specific. We're not allowed to make profit on these. So having introduced some efficiencies in a way, we can't just bank them as cash. We can bank them as better service, but we can't up the fee. So that's that's the reason it stayed the same.
Thank you. Page 102, which is land transport. Then going into car parks, Ladder Street car park. 104 is libraries. Note out of district can now come for free. Watch the Waimos come to town, eh? We'll be letting them swim for free, those over 80s in no time. What's going to come next, eh? Righty, license fees. Pretty unchanged. What's the offensive trades? Is it a builder that swears or? Yeah, an offensive trade, Paul. It's the plumber that wears his shorts too low. Or no, that's all right. No major. We won't die in a ditch on it, will we, Richard? I'm moving through fees pretty quick, so we'll go to 109 unless there's something anyone wants to pick up on. 109 is the museum, just some subtle increases. It's interesting to note that the cost of photocopying really hasn't really changed over the last 20 odd years, has it? It's still just 20 cents. Is it? Other than the library? Oh, I'll go to the museum. Go to the library for my photocopying. Gosh. Page 111 is motor camps. Just got a subtle changes there. 112 is parking. Unchanged, I see, and some notes in the report around CBD, etc., which is positive about not changing those rates. It's probably one place where COVID has affected revenue as far as effect on the activity to some extent. 113 is planning. She sort of gave some good detail too and conversation around the consultant point earlier. Anyone want any further discussion on any of that? Councillor Booth.
Assuming if you've got a notified consent and you're costing it, let's say $130 an hour, but it's costing you 180, should you not actually be, the true cost is actually somewhere in between if you aggregate those numbers? So should we not be charging and showing as a reflection of what it's costing to bring that service to the people?
Yeah, thank you, councillor Booth. If you were to ask the officers, they would say, yes, that'd be great. And we would like to find that sweet spot, if you like. But it was set by council some years ago. So I suppose that would be a question that we would have to come back with a report on and then allow council to debate it about where the equity is in that situation and what that sweet spot might be.
So what is the general rate? What is the subsidy effectively that we apply to planning overall? Do you know what it is as far as percentage of general rate going into planning?
From memory, it's 80%, your worship, or thereabouts.
80?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'd have to go and have a look in the revenue and financing policy to be certain. Azura, I don't suppose you have that in front of you, do you?
No, that's all right.
No, I do. So under district planning, it's 90 to 100% for district planning, and then district plan administration, it was 100% general rate funded. So it's around about, we aim for the sweet spot looking at this for district planning at about 90%. So in terms of recovery. Just having a look. Yeah, about 90%. And that's user fees recover about 90%, and about 10% is then recovered through the rate.
So we recover on the ones we're doing ourselves, we're recovering 90%. Is that correct? Or is
No, well, what we aim to do is, we know some will be briefed out. It's trying to get the sweet spot between not overcharging those that are done in-house, but not losing your shirt on those that are done out of house. So it's trying to get that sweet spot, or the balance between recovering an amount, knowing that you will do some in-house and you recover more than your costs, if you like, because when you brief it out, you won't recover all of your costs, so that the unders and overs even out is really what we're trying to do. Now, at the moment, we charge out at 135, don't we, Paul?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so I mean, you could look, for instance, at charging out at a senior planner rate of 165. You could change the policy, which would mean you would recover more, because the senior planners go out at $165. So you could look at doing something like that, which would recover more of that money. We can do some work, if you like, and bring it back when it's on an interim basis. But it's quite hard to know, because it depends on the number of consents that come in and the complexity. And then also, if we do get those additional planners in, then of course more is done in-house than is done out of house. So it's where that sits. It is a bit of an art. It's a bit of a dark
I guess if
art.
we're not recovering 100%, we're therefore being subsidised from somewhere else.
No, so if we pay a planner at, and I don't know, but we wouldn't be paying a planner 135, but we recover that per hour. So if, for instance, let's say the other planner charges us out at 80, at 180, then and an internal, and I've no idea what, I can do the numbers, but it's probably not fair on those here. But that means if we were to charge the planner out if the planner was getting paid $90, so to speak, or that was their true cost, 35 to 180 is $45. And so if we were to then charge 135 less $40, so $90, then we would be even on those. So if every hour was done on that basis, on a 50-50 split, we would come out exactly even. And it's trying to work out what is the balance, so that we don't overcharge and get a reputation of being too expensive for consents. Yeah, it's that weighted average.
You'd still have your standing charges. So, at the end of the day, if you went 50-50, and you'd aggregate that number to around about 150. But that's actually the cost of delivering that service. So therefore, that's what you should be charging in regards to recoup your costs.
But excuse me, but the planner might only, the actual true cost for the planner, I was just doing it in order to make the numbers, the true cost of the planner might only be $70 or $73.52 or whatever, because a large portion of that cost is their wage. Now, there is overhead and all of that stuff that's allocated, but the majority that goes into it is their wage. So we're not losing on all of it. We're trying to get the balance where we strike it as even. One way we could address it and look at it is if we were to model at the senior planner at 165 versus the planner, if you like, at 135 and see what difference it makes. But it is dependent also on what we can recover if we get additional planners in, what wage we pay them as well. Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Well, look, I'd just like to see a paper on it because it looks as though somewhere in the mix we're not quite right. And if we're going to attract planners, we're going to have to increase on a scale somewhere likelihood. So we want to recoup more. So
yes, but, I mean, yeah.
I mean, the traction of planners is probably slightly off to the side, but effectively it's how much we subsidise the activity. And so putting up those rates, and this is the, if we're subsidising it by 10% now, those rates might mean that we're only subsidising it by 7 or 8%, but it might actually not be moving the dial as much as we consider it. But it's a bit of a conversation around percentages in dollars, and so percentages that might be a small amount, but dollars it might be 100k. I don't know. So it's worth worth looking at. So let's maybe just pick up that point around those as well. Yeah, cool. Councillor Lime, sorry.
No, thank you, Worship. Look, it's just what I've heard is that we're actively seeking more planners. So if we can get the planners on board, I would have thought it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because we won't be using the consultants to any extent at all. And you could do a whole lot of work and then get planners on board and change the dynamics of the whole thing. So I don't know why we're spending quite so much time on it, because it could sort itself out with 2 new planners being appointed, and then the charges are similar and the same, get on with their lives. I don't know why we're labouring it. I really don't.
That's right. It's probably not going to take too much to run some numbers over, generally speaking, but no, point made. But that's been picked up anyway. So anything else in the planning part of it? If not, we'll move now to 116, which is records and information services charges. Photocopying is quite expensive in here, Councillor Parker. So maybe if the library does the photocopying, it may actually incorporate staff time, perhaps, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. So 117 sewer charges. All right, we'll dig ourselves out of that one and move on to 118. I'm only throwing those out there because Councillor Burt's not here. Social housing. So I'll just give you some time to look at the social housing. So I guess my only question around this is a little bit of money has to be spent or has been spent over the last few years around bringing it to the standard as far as new legislation, and there's ongoing improvements. They still seem pretty affordable at a very low level, and I think these are based on about 60%. Seems lower than that, but is it 60% of market? I can't remember where it's set, something like that. I'll go now to, would that be right, Nicole, roughly? Is it, as far as percentage, social housing, percentage of market, is it roughly sort of a 60% rate? Is that right? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Booth, question from you.
So have we actually increased the rents this year or not?
Yes, there is a, the 2 charts. One is current and 2 is proposed. So 139 to 145. Yeah, so just incremental, and ideally, I think our policy is to try and have it a neutral cost, isn't it? But we're probably not always quite there, but I think we haven't had some increases. I think the history of Nicole, we haven't had increases for some time, and we're now making those changes, I think, to make some to get some catch up. And I think we discussed that would take some years, incrementals over a period of time, Nicole.
Your worship, yes, the houses very similar to the huts are run on a neutral basis where possible, but we are very, very conscious that any increases you are talking about aged pensioners on fixed and also some of our vulnerable. So there's only so much money. So we're very conscious of the repairs and maintenance and trying to smooth that out each year. So we've got a rolling through the stock. And there are times the healthy homes has had a huge impact on the budgets. We do increase incrementally, but we do have phone calls from members of the 260 flats that we have that they have to go to WINS to increase their costs. So we are very conscious that you're doing this for the society, but yeah, it is a cost neutral where we can.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Councillor Booth. I'll stay there for a second, Nicole, just in case. Thanks.
So do you, how do you come about your actual rate that you charge them? Do you start with a commercial rent and then you charge 60% of that?
No, we take all of the costs associated each year. So the insurances, maintenance costs, the budgets that we set over the 3 years for each LTP, and then we spread that across and then leave ourselves a buffer in there for any unknown costs that come in, and then look at the current rental. So we do have a look at what's going on in the market and have a cost associated if it was in the open market. We work our costs and then find a position, but we don't go below that year's rental. So we don't reduce them down. There is always an incremental increase, but we start from the actuals. Yes.
So have you actually ever done a commercial appraisement of?
We do
You do
some, yes, yeah. Some of our flats are not, they're medium to low, and we've got a small percentage in the high. Yeah.
And what about depreciation? Is there anything accounted for that?
There will be, and that will go through the accounts along with all of our property. It doesn't come back into our particular budgets. It obviously is aggregated up and into.
Thank you.
Yes.
Cool. Perfect. Thanks, Nicole. No further questions, team? No, free to go. Appreciate that. Thank you. Sports grounds now on page 120. Nothing really there, nearly there. Page 121 is stormwater again, probably move through that. 122 is swimming pools. Always contentious. Swimming pool increases. Councillor Gilchrist.
Just I think there's a wee typo in the Sea Bay swimming pools, and I'm going to run in and buy 10 and get 11 swims for an adult for, over 65, so I'm not quite there yet. $5, I think there's just a zero missing. Just in case anyone tries to take advantage of that. What a bargain. Definitely want the over 65 swimming though, that's a great incentive.
Sorry.
Look, I think the key thing here is that with these increases that they're just well publicised within those pools, and then we'll get less messages come 1st of July. Cool. Water is 125. Just some little subtle changes, so not much there. And then waste minimisation on page 126. questions on waste? We've covered a bit of that as far as earlier on. And then if you go to 129, recycling, some subtle increases there as far as that. The likes of the e-scrap have always been interested. Is that, do we actually recover, or are we subsidising that significantly? Because it seems cheap, doesn't it, to drop a screen in?
We're still subsidising that. It's, to encourage, I guess, the separation of that out of the waste stream.
Yeah. So when you take the old computer or old television and pay 10 or 20 bucks, whatever it is, you're getting a bargain, really, aren't you? So yeah, you feel good about yourself. Cool. I think we've covered most of that. We can go back now to recommendations. Options page, you're on 68, I think.
Page 19.
Oh, sorry, what am I going? I'm giving myself the wrong.
It was page
19.
Yeah, paragraph 68.
Sorry, that's, thank you. Yeah, I wondered where I had that number. Yeah, there you go. Paragraph 68. Options, we've got option 1, which is approve the proposed draft annual plan, work program, budget and fees, etc. And then Mark, did you just want to briefly talk to consultation and what that looks like?
Yeah, so in terms of overall, I guess the sort of assessment against what's come through the plan is that it's largely in line with what we've described in year 2 of the LTP. Obviously, there's changes in there, and there's projects that have moved in and moved out, and numbers have changed. But in terms of significance level, we're saying it's largely in line with what's been proposed through the LTP, and we're not changing our levels of service. So what we're proposing is essentially sort of a bit of an information brochure that will go out publicly to our community via the courier, which is sort of along the lines of what we've done in the past. Some of you might have been here back in 2019, sort of a summary of some of the key projects, where some of the key projects are up to, a summary of the key variances, and some sort of financial information that just gives an overview really of the plan and what the key information coming through it are or is. And obviously there'd still be the opportunity for people to give a bit of feedback, and by legislation we still have to provide that opportunity for them to talk to you if they want to. So that's sort of where we're heading at the moment, but ultimately it's your choice. You can choose to consult on or in a way that you choose to. It's totally in your hands, and there is sort of a formal consultation document if you chose to consult on a specific sort of an issue. We would need to pull that together.
Cool, thank you. Nothing specific that anyone wants to draw attention to. I think it's BAU sort of very much so, as long as we meet the requirements of people being able to come and give us feedback and talk to us at hearings, etc. So those opportunities are still there. Oh, no, that's all right. No, just watching, reading the screen. So option 1, approve the proposed draft annual plan. Anyone prepared to move that? Councillor Wills, thank you. Councillor Gilchrist. Further discussion around option 1. I think we can put that motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you, team. As far as consultation, we don't have to move that. It's covered, isn't it? Yeah.
Proposed engagement approach on page 6.
Cool. Yeah, so just to bring attention, that's wrapped up in that motion. So B, which is confirms the proposed, we should move that separately since we didn't draw attention to that actually. So I'll move that. Councillor, give someone else a go. Councillor Booth, thank you. Put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. So anything further? I appreciate that, team. That was good. Worked through that well. Might have taken a little bit more time, but I think everyone's, it's a great opportunity to educate as we go through as well. So really appreciate that. So cool, thank you. And we break now, and then we've got
Phil's driver at 1, is it Andrew?
Yeah.
Oh, Phil's here now. Oh, he's there now. Is he right?
Yeah, so maybe if we look to break for half an hour, we could bring that forward slightly to 12:45. Yeah, Perfect. Okay, so back at 12:45. Councillor Riley, back at 12:45, mate.
Okay. Thank you.